Welcome to my first video about the kind of work I do and the basis on which I work. One of the most important aspects in it is that you're invited to be more embodied. It's very easy when we have a physical symptom, for instance, to try and get rid of it as quickly as possible. It's only human to try and do that with a pill or some other way to get rid of it. But very often, if you can remain a bit curious about it, then it has a better result and more resolution than if you just try to get rid of it straight away. Most of us don't like being got rid of. So I'd like to give a little illustration of how I work with that kind of bodily experience, and in telling a story about, I'll call him Frank. And Frank was in a group with me working on physical symptoms and dreams. And at some point he looked very agitated. This wasn't a very big group. He looked very agitated and he spoke out and he said, "My heart is just going boom, boom, boom." So we decided to take some time to help him process what was going on for him in his body. And I asked him I held my hands up like this and said, "Can you do that same thing, but then against my hands?" And he suddenly did it again, boom, boom, boom. Now you may ask why I held up my hands. That was because I saw there was a point that he was stopping with the movement he was making, and I was imagining something on the other side that is stopping him. So after a couple of moments going boom, boom, like this and up against my hand, I said, "Wow, that's a lot. There's a lot of strength in there, a lot of power, a lot of strength of feeling and sound. It sounds like something is wanting to be heard. What could it be? What do you imagine might want to be heard?" So Frank moved back a little bit and he sat quietly. He looked down. He looked up again. He said, "I want my pain to be heard. I want my pain to be heard." Slightly more loudly. So the story that emerged from this is that Frank's parents both died when he was very young. They died at the same time, and he was only 2. And after that, he was taken care of by his grandparents. Now, they took really good care of him in a practical sense, but they never spoke about his parents again. This is very often the case. You see, some people regard it as it would be only more distressing for the child if we speak of something that was very difficult for them about losing their parents. Actually, that's not the case. But this is the way they had decided to approach it, so they didn't ever speak about his parents again. So it was like his parents had suddenly disappeared off the face of the earth, and he wasn't allowed to speak about it because he clearly got the message. Children are so exquisitely sensitive. He clearly got the message that talking about his parents wasn't something that should happen. So he had carried with him for years. And no one had ever heard the pain of his loss. So there was a lot of anger in there, which was like this boom, this sound, but there was also a lot of grief. So when he looked up and said, "I want my pain to be heard." So I said, "I hear you." It was so obvious that there was such grief. And he started to cry. And his grief became deeper and deeper. He looked down again, went inward a bit, and sat there deeply crying. The group was holding the attention for him. So there was a safety to go in more deeply into what he felt. Finally, he could feel what he felt and be acknowledged in it. So, as is often the case, after a while, the grieving, the crying stopped. Crying usually has a natural cycle. If it is allowed, if it is accepted and acknowledged, it has a natural cycle. So at a certain point, he stopped crying and he looked up and looked around him and saw that the group were just sitting quietly there. They were there for him. And his eyes had a look of wonderment. This was the first time he had ever been able to cry like this. And he told us that this had been such a difficulty in his life that there were a number of relationships that had gone badly because of this, because he just couldn't express this feeling. He wasn't even really sure what it was. So by accessing that feeling in his heart, by making sound, by making movement, and having that being seen and heard, he was able to express this very important part of himself. So I would like to encourage everyone to try and pay attention to what our body is doing, what it's trying to tell us. Because there's always a part of us in a way that's against that. And I'll go into that at another time, the function of those parts of ourselves. But for now, I'd like to invite you, listen to your body.